In this very in-depth forecast, the Mississippi River Valley is currently being monitored for significant weather outbreak. A combination of linear severe storms and isolated supercells will harbor the possibility for multiple significant tornadoes, widespread swaths of destructive wind gusts upwards of 100 miles per hour, and widespread significant hail. This will be followed by another significant tornado outbreak, which is expected across the Dixie states into Saturday. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for March 14th of 2025. Today we have a massive moderate risk for the Mississippi River Valley, all the way from Iowa down into Mississippi here and northeastern Louisiana, including northern Mississippi, northeastern Louisiana, northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, a good portion of Illinois, southern Iowa, a good portion of Iowa there, and northeastern Missouri. This is going to be a combination of multiple moderate risk threats, including the possibility of a moderate risk for tornadoes for the southern half of this, including portions of the northern half of that as well, but more so towards the south, where we will see the possibility for more so isolated supercells than we will a linear system more so to the north, where we will see the greatest risk for tornadoes with those isolated supercells, as we have a 15% risk for tornadoes extending across the southern half of that moderate risk, as you can see here. Um, and as far as our hail risk goes, this is going to be our another moderate risk threat that we will be covering today. We have a 45% risk for damaging wind gusts, with the possibility of some very significant damaging wind gusts here that are going to be getting upwards of 100 miles per hour within the 45% area. But some gusts could be upwards of 100 miles per hour in some isolated areas. But either way, you're going to see some very widespread damaging wind gusts that could potentially be destructive. So definitely make sure you are staying alert if you live in any of these affected areas. As far as our hail risk goes, we do have a 30% risk for hail, so definitely not as bad, but still pretty bad, where we could see the possibility of some widespread hail and some hail that is going to be getting greater than 2 inches indicated by this hashed area. For tomorrow, whoa, this is a big one. I know what you're looking at here. This hasn't been issued in this is the third time this has ever been issued by the SPC. A day 2 high risk for tomorrow. So we have a high risk for central Alabama into central and southern Mississippi here, with an enhanced risk that extends all the way up into Tennessee, back into Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. So we have a very, very significant risk for tomorrow as well. We currently have a 30% tornado risk for the high risk area, and that's going to be the primary fueling risk for that high risk area tomorrow. We also have a 30% damaging wind risk with the possibility of some significant damaging wind gusts, as well as a 30% hail risk with the possibility of some very significant hail. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk across a lot of the eastern coast there, extending from Maryland down into northern Florida there. Storms definitely won't be as bad as what we will see today or definitely tomorrow. Storms will definitely be a lot more tame, but definitely make sure you're checking the weather if you live in this affected area for 3 days out. For our day 4, day 8 outlook, we don't have anything issued. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, or our risk for flash flooding for today, thankfully it's not going to be as bad as our risk for severe weather. However, we do have a marginal risk for flash flooding for the Mississippi River Valley area, and a lot of the areas that are going to be affected by severe thunderstorms today. So definitely make sure you're watching out for that as well. On top of that risk for severe thunderstorms, even though that is definitely going to trump that. For tomorrow, though, we do have a moderate risk to the north of that high risk area for southern into central Tennessee, extending up to Nashville, I believe, northern Georgia, northern Alabama, and northeastern Mississippi there, where we could see some widespread flash flooding and potentially even some significant flash flooding in some areas. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our high-resolution ensemble forecast system here. Starting off with our upper air maps, we're going to be going through our 500 millibars and then our 850 millibars and then our 200 millibars on pivotal weather. So we're going to be looking at the upper air setup and what's going to be fueling these storms, what is going to be the engine behind these storms, and some of the risks as well, especially with the 850 millibars when we look at our risk for tornadoes. So the primary engine that is going to be backing these storms is going to be this powerful trough that is advecting out of the west here, with a very powerful jet with a large amount of defluence aloft. The jet there is getting upwards of 110 knots as it moves eastward. And it is advecting across a very broad area. The entire moderate risk here will be able to be supported by this trough here. However, again, the main area for the main area directly in that exit region of that trough will be seeing the primary risk of severe damaging wind gusts, as a lot of the upper level winds will be mixing down to the surface and supporting a greater risk for significant damaging wind gusts in that area. However, we have some very potent defluence aloft with like you can kind of just eyeball it here. We have wind vectors going directly to the north on the top end of that trough here, and then wind vectors going to the northeast towards the bottom, and even towards the center of that moderate risk, they're still going to the northeast, but a little bit more towards the north. So we have a lot of defluence aloft and a lot of lift that will support a lot of storms. We will see a lot more forcing further to the north, which will further enhance the possibility of this forming into a linear risk further to the north, and in turn a greater risk for significant damaging wind gusts and then a tornado risk the further north you go. However, you definitely will still see the possibility of significant tornadoes for the area that is included in that risk for significant damaging wind gusts. However, all of this area can see the possibility for multiple tornadoes, some of which will be strong. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low-level jet here for our risk for tornadoes and where we're going to see the greatest shear, we will see a very strong low-level jet with 850 millibar winds getting upwards of 70 knots here, especially to the north of that 15% risk for tornadoes into that 10% risk for tornadoes. So there will be a lot of abundant shear, and with instability that extends all the way up to the north there, which we will look at later. That will make the perfect combination for significant tornadoes, so potentially even multiple significant tornadoes across this area, but at minimum multiple tornadoes across this area, regardless of if they're significant. However, the further south you go, we won't have as strong of a low-level jet. However, we will still have a low-level jet regardless to support that risk for tornadoes. However, the further south you go, you will see more instability, which will fuel stronger storms and basically make up for the lack of a stronger low-level jet. But we will look at that instability later, or I mean weaker low-level jet, but we'll look at our instability later. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and our extreme upper level winds, we have a pretty nice upper level jet here in our 200 millibars. It's not really going to extend up into the northern half of that moderate risk. It's mainly going to top out around Missouri into southern Iowa there, and with the majority of our flow, our strong flow, being aloft towards towards the south of that risk. So further south, we will see a little bit more of a hail risk, which is why our hail risk is around here, where we will see some isolated supercells and some nice instability, as well as some greater shear in the upper levels, which will support more of a hail risk, opposed to further north, where we won't really have that strong upper level jet from our 200 millibars, and overall less of a hail risk as a result. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, or our directional shear for our risk for tornadoes. Again, as I previously mentioned, that stronger low-level jet further to the north will support a lot more greater shear to the northern half of that 15% tornado risk, and the possibility for some significant tornadoes. Further down to the south, we won't have as strong directional shear. However, we will definitely have strong directional shear and directional shear that will be sufficient for strong tornadoes, especially with that increased instability the further south you go. Taking a look at our 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear values here and the risk for hail, we have a lot of bulk shear further to the north as a result of that 500 millibar trough there, without really too much influence from our 200 millibars. And a lot of this could also potentially be coming from our low-level jet as well, contributing to our bulk shear values. However, you can see across that risk for hail around the southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, southern Illinois, Kentucky region, right around here towards the center of that moderate risk area, we have some really nice bulk shear values, upwards of 50, 55, 56, even some 60, potentially even approaching 70 knots in some areas, which will definitely be pretty supportive and pretty conducive of some significant hail and some large hail across this region. Taking a look at our temperature models here, keep in mind our high resolution ensemble forecast system is a very conservative model and likes to downplay a lot of things as it is taking in the factors from multiple different models and averaging them out. So it tends to be a lot more conservative as some of those models will downtrend or be less than some others. However, that gives us a nice area of agreement or as it averages out. So definitely keep that in mind that this model is pretty conservative. So these values could be higher or lower compared to what is actually being depicted here. This is just the average of multiple different high resolution convective allowing models. So we have some pretty warm temperatures here that appear to be getting upwards of 70, 75, potentially even some 80 degrees somewhere in there. We also have a really nice pressure tongue. Our surface low is back into Nebraska and Kansas. However, we have a really nice invisible cold front along a pressure tongue there that is going to swing, just absolutely swing eastward as our surface low there pushes into the Great Lakes area, and that is going to trigger our risk for severe thunderstorms. However, with our degrees getting upwards of 70 to 75 and potentially even some 80 somewhere in here, that will definitely work in tangent with our dew points to support some pretty decent instability across this region. Taking a look at our dew points here and how that's going to work in tangent with our temperatures for our instability, we are expected to see a pretty nice moisture tongue here that is going to extend all the way up to the St. Louis metro region, with dew points that are going to be getting upwards of 60 degrees all the way up to St. Louis. However, with some warm temperatures around the 70s to 80s being across this entire affected region, we won't really see much temperature fluctuation, so that's not really an issue that we're going to have to worry about across this moderate risk area. The main contributing factor to differing instability across this area will be our dew points, as our dew point for some stronger instability will be limited further south, as our 15% tornado risk seems to highlight that area as far north as our dew point tongue is probably going to get, upwards of 60 degrees. And anywhere in that dew point tongue of 60 degrees with our 70-degree temperatures, we will see some pretty decent instability, some pretty strong instability that will definitely support the possibility of some significant severe thunderstorms. And as far as that risk for significant damaging wind gusts goes, again, we have some very strong forcing in our upper levels, some really strong shear, and a lot of those upper level winds will be mixing down to the surface as a result. Um, we will see some decent instability the further north you go. However, it definitely won't get stronger the further north you go. A lot of that strong instability will be limited further down south, but it will be sufficient for some significant severe thunderstorms. However, that risk for significant tornadoes will be limited further down to the south where that pressure tongue is. Or sorry, moisture tongue. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our risk for severe weather across this region, we have a really scary sight here, as we don't really have any cloud cover across this region, allowing for some strong diurnal heating, some really warm temperatures to build, especially at the surface, and a lot more surface heating will allow for a lot more instability across this region and contribute to some higher instability values. Further down to the south, where we do have more moisture, though, we will see a little bit thicker cloud cover, but that doesn't really seem to really affect our instability too much, as our cloud cover actually looks like it's going to be a little bit more of an indicator of instability than a limiter of instability, as it looks a lot more grainy in our low levels here, indicating more of a cumulus field, which indicates some greater instability across this area, or a field of some really strong instability. Taking a look at our instability and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms, our risk for tornadoes, and our risk for damaging wind gusts, we're not really going to focus too much on the hail risk, as the hail risk will be supported by our instability either way. We have some really nice instability values. K5s are going to be getting upwards of 1,000 at minimum, upwards of up to the as far north as St. Louis there, with that moisture tongue, we won't really see as stronger instability values the further north you go. However, we will have some strong instability values for that 45% risk for damaging wind gusts, which again will support some greater mixing and a greater risk for damaging wind gusts. However, further down to the north, where we have some strong shear and even stronger instability, we will that will make for a very nice smoothing of the potential for a tornado outbreak across this area, and multiple tornadoes, some of which could definitely be strong. Taking a look at our surface-based cape as well as our convective inhibition, um, our convective inhibition for how that's going to affect our severity of storms as well as storms overall, and our surface-based cape for how that's going to affect the possibility of surface-based storms. We won't really have any problem whatsoever with surface-based instability, as it's pretty much going to be just as powerful as our most unstable cape values. However, as far as convective inhibition goes, we will have a little bit of convective inhibition across this area before storms can actually move into this area. That will keep the lid on the environment, prevent warmer from rising, prevent storms from firing too early. It probably won't inhibit storms too much. And, however, the convective inhibition will probably even increase the potential for severe thunderstorms, the significance of storms, as it will act, as storms will act more explosive as that cap breaks. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms, or mainly how that's going to aid our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. We don't really have a whole lot of 0 to 3 kilometer instability for the to the north there. However, for the areas included in our 15% tornado risk, we do have some nice 0 to 3 kilometer instability there that will definitely help with tornado genesis and the possibility for tornadoes across that 15% risk for tornadoes. Taking a look at our energy helicity index and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, for that 15% tornado risk, we have some really strong energy helicity index values where we're going to see a great mixture of instability and a great mixture of some strong shear, which will lead to some great energy helicity index values. Energy helicity index is a combination of our energy and our helicity, or our directional shear and our cape. So when those two overlap, again, that's going to harbor the risk for tornadoes, or at least this is a model of indicating where those parameters overlap and the severity of which they do. So we have some really strong energy helicity index values that are getting into some extreme values, upwards of 8, 8.2, 7s, the 6s, just widespread. Even energy helicity index values upwards of 4 to 5, even some 3s tend to indicate the possibility of some significant tornadoes. However, with energy helicity index values being this strong, this abundant, and this widespread, that's a very, very big indicator of the risk that we have at hand. Taking a look at our significant tornado parameter, or basically our energy helicity index on steroids, where it takes in more of our parameters in the environment to give us a more realistic view of what our risk for tornadoes is going to look like. However, it can sometimes become a little bit more exaggerated, I've come to notice, so that's why I tend to stick with energy helicity index values. However, the fact that SDP takes in stuff like convective inhibition is in just overall more environmental features across this area, opposed to our energy helicity index, which only looks at our instability and our directional shear. I also like to use this as a handy tool during significant outbreaks like this. We have some really strong significant tornado parameter values there in our 15% tornado risk, extending all the way down throughout our 15% tornado risk as well. And with with our high resolution ensemble forecast system being a lot more conservative than, say, your typical model, depending on its trends. A very scary sight to see, and a very, very big testimony to the risk that we have at hand. Taking a look at the SPC's mesoanalysis here, I'm here because I wanted to look at a couple of parameters that we don't really get the chance to look at with normal weather models that will provide more insight into our risk for damaging wind gusts and our risk for hail. The things I want to start with is our damaging wind gust risk, starting with our downdraft cape, or the tendency for air to sink instead of the tendency for air to rise, opposed from actual cape. we have a lot of downdraft cape, a lot of extreme downdraft cape that will be a very, very conducive, very supportive of some strong downdrafts and the potential for some very significant downdrafts as well, and thus a significant risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. And then we can also look at our derecho composite model. I'm not really sure how accurate this is, as we do have an 8 down to the south where we won't really have all that much of a risk for significant damaging wind gusts, as our storm mode won't really allow for as much of a significant damaging wind gust risk, as well as our forcing it just won't really allow for as much of a significant damaging wind gust risk compared to up north. However, we do have at least a 1 and a 2 across this region, um, for the possibility of a derecho. So that just I don't really know how accurate this is, but it is a testimony for the risk for significant damaging wind gusts across this region at the very least. We can also look at our hail risk as well, starting off with our large hail parameter. We do have that risk for large hail being further down to the south, with upwards of 32 on our large hail parameter across Arkansas, which will likely extend further to the north as moisture advex further to the north as well. And then for our SARS hail size, we can also look at this, and we have some pretty significant sizes for our SARS hail size. Again, I don't really know how accurate this is, but it is a nice analog for if where we may see the potential for some large hail and potentially the size of that hail as well. And we could see some hail sizes potentially upwards of 2.5 inches, 2.75 inches, 3 inches, and potentially even to 4 inches with moisture as it streams further up north. But again, that hail risk won't be as severe as our other risks. And as far as our SAR significant hail percentage. This is another interesting one. It does have upwards of 90 and 100% for some smaller areas, but overall it's looking more around an 80 and a 70%, which could potentially increase as diurnal heating remains and moisture streams further to the north. But again, that hail risk is definitely not going to be as substantial as our tornado and damaging wind gust risk threat is today. Now that I've told you the weather, please make sure that you're staying weather alert if you live in the affected areas. And make sure that if you have any friends or family that may live in these affected areas, that you're keeping them weather aware. Um, I do have a statement that I want to make about tomorrow's risk, or day 2 high risk. Um, the potential for a forecast will vary significantly. I may not be able to create a forecast on this tomorrow as a result of the fact that I may be chasing across this area. So instead of being able to see a forecast on the day 2 high risk, you could potentially see a chase live stream across this area. And if not, you will definitely see a chase video of our chase during this day 2 high risk. If not, if we don't go chasing, then there definitely will be a forecast for this day 2 high risk. But now that I've told you the weather, again, make sure that you're staying weather alert, and hopefully I'll see you on the live stream later today.